Good afternoon, everybody. I am Inez Sharp, Editor-in-Chief of Spotlight magazine. In case you don't know it, a little bit of promotion here. And welcome to Julia Quinn, best-selling author, and who we're very, very happy to have here on the ZEIT stage. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here. I've heard so much about the Frankfurt Book Fair over the years, and I knew it was big, but I did not realize it was this big. It's incredible. You guys are so lucky to have this right here in your backyard.
Now, I'm assuming that everybody who's standing here knows about Julia's career as a best-selling author of historical novels. 30, I counted how many?
About, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I never thought I'd be the person who didn't know how many books she'd written, but I think I've become the person who's not positive. But that's also because I've written novels and novellas and then some short stories, so it's
and
hard
a graphic
to decide.
novel.
And I do have one graphic novel, which unfortunately is not available in German, but you can get it in English, Brazilian, Portuguese, or Spanish.
Okay, right. Okay.
Oh, and soon in Croatian, if you, yes.
Now, our focus today, obviously, this also comes as no surprise, are the Bridgerton novels, and especially, if I'm allowed to hold it up, if I can, Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. Everybody knows it, I'm sure. Hands up, please. Who has read it?
Oh. Wow,
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, but I do have a little bit careful about spoilers. I can see there might be one or two there.
Well, if you haven't read it, is there anyone who hasn't read it and also hasn't seen the show?
Ah.
Okay, then I don't think you have to worry about spoilers.
Okay. Julia, the moment when Bridgerton came to you, when was that? Can you describe that?
No, I can't describe it because I can't really remember it. So this is actually the fourth Bridgerton book. The first one is The Duke and I, about Simon and Daphne, who are also the first season of the television show. And that book was released in the United States in January of 2000. So because of the way publishing works, I would have written that in 1998. Another show of hands. How many of you weren't alive in 1998? Okay, all right, there we go. So I get forgiven if I can't remember it all, but I do get asked that question a lot, and so I was able to piece together the best that I can figure out. Is what happened was I actually created the character of Simon first. I had met somebody. Oh, sorry, someone's yelling. I thought they're talking to me. I'd met somebody who went to school with my husband at medical school who had a very severe stutter. And in the book, Simon's speech difficulties are actually much more prominent than in the show. And it just made me think about how that would affect your life to have this difficulty communicating with people. And also, probably because historical romance has so many bad parents, I thought, well, how would it affect you if you had a parent who really didn't understand this and looked down on you because of this and didn't treat you well? And so I ended up giving Simon such a terrible childhood that I decided that when he found someone to fall in love with, she should be from the best family ever, and that's how we got the Bridgertons.
Okay, excellent. So when you started writing, even back then, the historical romance genre was already quite a full field. So what were you bringing to this genre that you thought hadn't been there before?
It wasn't so much that I was bringing things that hadn't been there. I was just finding the things that really I thought were important and liked best. I really liked books with humor in it. And, there wasn't a lot of it, but it was there. I'm absolutely not the first. So I wanted to do that. I really enjoyed having, the big family dynamics. I really did want to showcase more female friendship. I think that in novels, whether they're romance novels or anything else, one way to make a very interesting character and to give your character a very interesting history is to isolate them in some way. So you find a lot of characters who have, very bad relationships with their parents or with their siblings or whatever. And I felt like there were a lot of romances where the hero had this group of friends, but I was like, why does the heroine needs to have friends too? So you'll find in a lot of my books from the very beginning, the heroine will have, not all of them, but a lot of them, she'll have a very close friend or a cousin or sister. So I really wanted to bring in romances where the main characters had very positive and important relationships with people other than their romantic partner as well.
Lady Featherington's Society Papers, was that part of the plan from the beginning, or did it pop up and surprise you somewhere?
Okay, so it's Lady Whistledown.
Sorry, Lady
That's
Whistledown,
okay.
yes.
It popped up pretty quickly. So what happened was, it wasn't in the initial idea when I turned in, a proposal to my editor. It wasn't there. And I was writing, I wrote the prologue first, which was all about Simon. And when I started the first chapter, I had this scene between Daphne and Violet, and there's something that writers call an info dump, an information dump. And what that is, you're at the beginning of the book, and you've got all this background information that you really think you need to get across. In my case, it was, you have this really big family, and the kids are named alphabetically, and the father has passed away, and the mother wants them to get married, all these things. And it's like, how do you say all this at the beginning so the reader knows without it being really awkward? Because Daphne and her mother aren't going to say all this to each other. They know this. And so, because you have to remember your characters are speaking to each other. They're not speaking to the reader. But then it occurred to me that if you have a gossip columnist, it's her literal job to dump information. And she is speaking to the reader.
Perfect sense, yes.
Yeah. And so I remember thinking, why hasn't anybody done this? This is like the easiest shortcut ever. So I wrote the first Lady Whistledown column, and then somehow it just seemed natural for them to start saying, well, who is she anyway? And that's when I realized, oh, her identity is a secret, and it just took off.
Okay, perfect. Do you then plan everything out, or, in this case, it sounds as if you solved a problem a little bit further along, maybe. How do you write?
I do plan in advance, but I'm not completely. So there's some writers who I have friends who write incredibly detailed outlines. I know one who once wrote an 85-page outline for a book that was only 250 pages. And I said, that's just a first draft. And then I have other friends who say they can't do it at all. They just have to start. And I'm in between. I do write an outline or a synopsis, whatever you want to call it. But the beginning of it is all about the characters. It's all about, I need to know everything about the characters that happen before page 1. I need to know, do they have a big family? Are they an only child? Are their parents alive? Was there trauma in their past? What has happened to them before we open the book? Because we're all made by our experiences. And so I will sort of work all that out in the outline, and I may actually have things in there that never make it into the book, but because I know it, I'd like to think it helps me to know the characters better and just write the characters better. And so I do all that, and then once I'm kind of done with that part, then I start getting into the plot, being like, okay, well, it opens like this, and then this happens, that happens. And sometimes it's so specific, I'll put in pieces of dialogue that I'm going to use. And that's mostly because if you think of it, you better write it down or you're going to forget it. And then I'll also have parts where I will literally write, things happen. Because I don't know what things are going to happen, and I don't have the time to sit there and figure it out. I need to just move on and hope that I will think of those things later on.
Do you have a character that you identify with? That doesn't have to be a favorite character, but somebody who you say, there's a bit of me in there.
Well, first of all, thank you for not asking me who my favorite character is. My publicist, I'm sure she's laughing because I get asked that all the time. And sometimes people say to me, what's your favorite book? And I explain why I don't have one. And then she said, well, what's your favorite couple then? And I said, well, that's kind of the same question. But the character, I've long said that the characters, that I'm a mix of Penelope and Eloise and Francesca. But that was a while ago, and I've grown since then, and I think I might be a Violet now.
Oh, okay. Because I was making guesses, Julia.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and I thought you might be a cross between Penelope and Colin. And the reason is Okay, so in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, we have, I can't remember which chapter, Colin was silent for a moment. It hadn't occurred to him that he enjoyed his writing. It was just something he did. He did it because he couldn't imagine not doing it. And he thought back and realized he felt a strange rush of satisfaction when he wrote a phrase that was exactly right, a sentence that was particularly true. Is that you talking to us?
The second half is, I do get that rush when I get a sentence exactly right, but I'll be honest, I can absolutely imagine not writing.
Okay.
You know, I know that and this always disappoints readers, but I know that there are some writers who, you know, that they're writing in their sleep, they can't imagine it. I close my computer at the end of the day and it is closed, and I don't think about my characters all the time. I'm very compartmentalized, and that's actually part of the reason why I end up writing the second epilogues that the books have, because readers would come up to me and they'd say, well, what happened this? And, you know, did Hyacinth find the diamonds? And did Francesca have a baby? And all these things. And I would say, I don't know. And then they'd say, well, what do you mean you don't know? And I'd say, I don't know. If I don't have to bring them, if I'm not bringing them back as a secondary character for another novel, I don't really think about what happened to them. You know, when I finish the book, it's done. It's sort of, a professor of Shakespeare once said, there's no act 6.
Okay.
You know, Shakespeare has 5 acts and that's it. And so the readers were so upset. They were like, well, you have to know this. And so that's why I ended up writing these extra epilogues. I'm like, all right, well, if I'm going to sit down and write about it, then I will figure out what happened.
Okay. Can you tell us, because as I've been preparing this interview, I've been thinking, so where does Julia Quinn write? What does that space look like? Can I imagine a Regency writing desk, or can I say something more banal than that?
No, you know, before COVID, I did a lot of my writing in cafes, actually. Yeah, okay. It was nice for me to get out of the house, just to be around people, even if I wasn't talking to them, you know, because one thing is, like, if I'm at the house, I'll be like, I'm just going to close my eyes for a minute. And then, you know, you've taken a nap, or you're like, wow, I really want to do laundry. You know, so sometimes it's really good to go out. And I do, you know, some writing at home, especially in the summer. I do enjoy taking my laptop into my backyard. Right. We actually have wisteria growing.
Lovely.
So we were Bridgerton before Bridgerton. And then I also, because I'm always running behind, and especially at the end of the book, I desperately need to work and be focused. I will often go away for a week by myself with no one else.
Oh, right.
And I usually go to the same place in Mexico, which is, you know, not so far for us. And I get there, and they're always saying, you know, why are you working in Mexico? And I say, well, I have to work somewhere. I might as well do it here where it's lovely, and people are bringing me guacamole. And so, yeah.
Sounds good to me.
But you get a lot done when you just go away from everyone.
Is there a set of values at the heart of Bridgerton? I mean, in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, it's really the family is always there. The family is very central. Are there any other values that are in the stories?
I think that's the central value for all the stories, is just the importance of family. Whether, you know, in this case, it's your family or your found family. I mean, not everybody is born to a family that deserves them. And I think just it's a lot about just the importance of our relationships, and obviously about the romantic relationship, because that's the crux of the book. But, you know, very few of my characters exist without their other people in their lives as well, and I think that's very important. And I think that if there is something common that runs through my books, is that, you know, most everybody has someone else in their life as well who is important to them. And if they don't, hopefully they'll find it through the other person.
Do you have a Bridgerton vocabulary? When you started writing, I mean, you've included things that most of us weren't familiar with, but I think existed before, like the ton, for example. Did you think about, because obviously people in the novels don't talk as if they're in Regency England necessarily. There's an aspect of it, but you're finding a way to appeal to the reader? Yeah,
you know, I think it's not that hard for me to slide into it. I think in part because it is written as opposed to spoken. So I just slide into a different style because I'm not saying it. You know, it would feel very awkward for me to talk the way my characters talk, but writing somehow just kind of slides right in. And, you know, I've written a lot of books in that time period, so it's just, I don't even really think about it. Okay. You know, I just sort of pick up bits and pieces.
Right, okay. So you have quite strong female characters, I think we can say that. Balancing that with the sort of the norms of Regency England, which was not hyper-feminist. How do you do that?
Well, you know, you're writing historical romance, but you're writing it for a modern audience. And so both, what's the word I'm looking at? Just both sensibilities come in at the same time. And I think it's important to notice that there have always been strong women. Mm-hmm. So those are the ones I want to write about. And, you know, the books, I think, do have a feminist slant, and I'm very proud of that. But, you know, I'm actually not writing the characters who sort of broke all the rules and changed history. They're not the ones who were ever going to be the first ones to go to university, you know, in part because it was just too early. You know, in England and Scotland, I think they got started, women, it was like 1870 they were finally able to. And so it's, in some ways they're not, I'm still trying to figure out the best way to explain this, but these are women who I think are amazing, but in terms of the way we judge history, wouldn't be considered extraordinary. Right. They're not the women who, you know, it's not Marie Curie. They didn't invent radiation. They didn't, you know, but I also think if I were back then, I don't think I would have been extraordinary. I don't think I would have done anything that would have put me in the history books, but I'd like to think that my life would have been important and worth telling. Okay. And so I really like, you know, the idea that there are women who perhaps, you know, didn't make the history books and maybe didn't want to do anything to make the history books, but who still have stories that are worth knowing about. And I think there are a lot of people like that today, too. Mm-hmm. And I think this is especially important for women in history because, you know, history is all about the men. So I think, you know, it was much easier for a man to make the history books than for women. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a saying we have in English, I don't know, do you know Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers?
Yes, that's
so that
maybe young audience, but
they're dancers. And Fred Astaire he's super famous. I mean, this is from like the 1930s and 40s. But they said, you know, she had to do everything he did too, but in high heels and backwards. Yeah, you know, but he was still the more famous one. So I really like telling the stories of these women who are quietly feminist, who are, you know, doing everything they can to expand their world, and maybe they're not expanding enough to end up in the history books, but they're still worth reading about.
Okay. This question comes from me, and everybody in the audience who's in their 20s or 30s will please excuse this question. So you've got your strong, independent female characters. What about romance with older characters? A story where the two characters are maybe not so young anymore.
Well, you know, when I started, I was more the age of these characters, and that's sort of how, you know, romance has come about. And also, you know, in Regency times, the people getting married tended to be younger. You know, and I do have Violet, who's become an incredible character. And people have said to me, you know, we want Violet to have a story. And honestly, I felt like I didn't even know how to write someone who was good enough for her. So I haven't done that. Although in a short story called Violet in Bloom, which I think is available in German I'm looking for somebody who might know. It might be I don't know if it's available in German actually, but you do actually get some of Violet's story when she meets Edmund. I don't know. Maybe it's because, like, at my stage of life, you know, I'm 54 and I'm happily married and I've been with the same person for a really long time. And so I feel like if I were going to write something about someone my age, I might be looking for a different type of story than a romance because it's not sort of my stage of life right now, even though I know it is for other people, but for me it's not. And so it might be a different type of book for somebody my age.
Okay. Right. A little bit of a cheeky question. Do you have a Bridgerton outfit at home? And if you do...
I do not. I have a tiara, though, because people give me tiaras. So I have that. I have I have a lot of floral dresses. I seem to get very nice floral dresses lately, but no, I don't have a Bridgerton outfit.
Okay.
But I was an extra in Queen Charlotte.
Oh, right. Where?
And so in episode 6, which is the last episode, if you, right after the baby's born, and that's not a spoiler because these are real people in history and this baby really was born. So that's not giving away anything. But right up, they're admiring him, saying he's perfect. And then right after that, it cuts to a scene in the park, and it opens on me, and I'm in a white curly wig. So that wasn't Regency, but that was a Georgian outfit.
Right, yeah.
And it was really hot, really, really hot that day. And also, it was kind of a last-minute thing that I went to be in the show. And it was on location, so they didn't have all their costumes with them, so they kind of had to make do. And they had to literally sew me into the costume because it wasn't made for me. But that's not the funny part. The funny part is then they had to cut me out. And I do actually have a picture of me. I think it's in my Instagram. In fact, it is. Okay. If you go to my Instagram, and please follow me on Instagram because honestly, I am delightful on social media. I'm on Instagram and I'm on Facebook, and I post different things on both. Sometimes it's the same, but usually it's quite different. So please follow me. But if you go back on Instagram a bit, you can see the picture of them literally cutting me out of the dress.
Okay. If you did have a Bridgerton dress...
One minute. I brought that up to say that it's not that comfortable, which is why I don't have a Bridgerton dress.
But if you could choose, what would it look like? You're sitting at home, you've made a dinner, it's maybe... There's a
Bridgerton
book.
I'm in my pajamas. I don't... And a lot of times people will say to me, like, well, do you want to live back... Of course you want to live back in Regency times. And honestly, I do not. I love writing about it, but you know what I love more than that? I love being able to vote. I love being able to own property. I love getting vaccines and antibiotics. So no, I will stick in modern times.
Okay. This isn't the book that we're talking about now, but the Queen Charlotte book was basically writing backwards in a sense. Tell us about that experience.
Yeah, so it's very meta. I don't know if you say that in German, but we had books that made a show, that made another show, that made a book. So it's kind of like reverse engineering. And what happened was I was just minding my own business at home, and Shonda Rhimes, which is always a very big, exciting thing when Shonda calls. And she said, "Oh my gosh, we're doing a spin-off." And I'm thinking, what? I'd never even occurred to me there'd be a spin-off. And it was about Queen Charlotte, which is, very funny in many ways because she's the only main character who wasn't in the books. But I love her. It's my favorite change to the show, and I love the way she's written, and I love the way Golda Rosheuvel plays her. I got to spend last weekend with Golda in Munich, and she's so wonderful. Anyway, so she said they were going to do this show, and my husband said, "You should write the book." And I said, "Oh, I don't know how that would work. I don't think that's..." And he kept being like, "Write the book, write the book, write the book." And so when I finally met Shonda in person, because at the premiere for season 2 of Bridgerton, and I hadn't met her because of COVID, I suggested it to her, and she said, "Oh, I had the same idea." So I'm like, okay. And then I had about 6 weeks to think about how I was going to do this before she sent me the scripts. And I tried to research, how do you turn television scripts into a novel? And there's nothing. There's absolutely nothing out there.
I'm surprised there.
No, I mean maybe like Jaws.
Okay. Yeah.
Somebody tried to do a novelization of Jaws, or it's like, there are a lot of Star Wars novels, but it's more like fan fiction. Yeah. It's like in the world of Star Wars. It's not the actual movie. And so I finally decided, well, people might say I did it badly, but no one could say I did it wrong, because there's no right or wrong. And so finally she sent me the 6 scripts, and I had to figure out how to turn that into a novel, and it was very much like a puzzle.
Okay.
And I like puzzles, so it turned out to be very fun for me, but like the first thing we did was figure out that we could only tell the story of when they were younger. I didn't have enough room or time to do both. And then I decided, okay, whose point of view is this book going to be in? And I chose 4 people, Charlotte, George, Agatha, who's young Lady Danbury, and Brimsley, Charlotte's servant, which was, I thought, bring in a very interesting perspective. And then you go through and you have to look at each scene and think, whose point of view am I going to be in? Because when you watch the show, for the most part, you're not in anybody's point of view. You know, you're just kind of, you're watching. And so I had to decide, okay, whose head are we going to get into for each one? And, you know, how do I fit this all together? It doesn't necessarily follow the order exactly. And then I also got to add a few scenes or expand scenes. So it was a really interesting experience. I very much enjoyed doing it.
And you're dealing with history to a certain extent.
Yes. So it was the first time that I'd written characters who were real people. And so you try to bring in bits of history, but we did have a disclaimer at the beginning, which is saying that this is not a history lesson. This is Queen Charlotte of the Bridgerton world, and things are different. Like, for example, you know, in Bridgerton world, Queen Charlotte was speaking English when she arrived, and in real world, she only spoke German. So actually, one of the things that I did in the book that I had a lot of fun with that is not in the television show was try to talk a little bit about just her experience with German being her main language. Because I don't speak German, but I've studied it a little bit, and one of my favorite things about the German language is the way you guys just keep making bigger and bigger words. I think it's so much fun. And so, you know, she has a frustration with English that she can't just like make up her own words and put them together. And so I tried to make that a bit of a like ongoing theme in the book. You know,
we had Backpfeifengesicht, which I actually don't know in German either. Is that a real word? Backpfeifengesicht? Yeah, it's like a face that deserves
to be smacked. Yes, that was in the book. Yeah. No, that is a real word. I looked that up and I was like, we should have that in the United States too. I can think of a lot of people, usually ones I see on the news. Sorry. You might know we have an election coming up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sorry. I'm a little stressed out about it.
Go back to Regency England.
That's all right. If you follow me on social media, you probably know which side I'm rooting for.
Okay. What do you, I'm sure you've asked all the time, what do you read, not for inspiration, what do you read for your own enjoyment?
I read lots of different things. I mean, I do read romance. And I do, on Facebook, actually, every Tuesday, I recommend a historical romance. If you like historical romance, I can't guarantee they've all been translated into German, but I do recommend them. It's usually something new or something that's, on sale in the United States, sorry. And then I also recommend other books at other times. You know, I try maybe about once a month on Instagram just to have a post where it's like, what am I reading? I'm glad you asked, and mention some. But I enjoy nonfiction. I enjoy, I like mysteries if they're funny. I tend to only like funny mysteries.
Is there a book that's in your suitcase, in your bag at the moment, something you're enjoying?
There is. It's actually a children's book because one of the things that I'm very involved in the United States is fighting the rise of book challenges and book bans. And that's something that is very upsetting to me that's happening in the United States. And I'm working with a bookstore that is putting together a monthly book club where they ask an author to recommend 3 books that have been banned at 3 different age levels. And so for my young adult book, I picked a book by Angie Thomas called The Hate You Give, which was made into a movie. It's a wonderful book. And for the picture book, it's called The Family Book by Todd Parr, which is another wonderful book. And then the book that I brought with me because I needed to finish it, because I needed to write my letter about it, is called Front Desk by Kelly Yang. I don't know if it's in German, but it's a marvelous, marvelous book about a girl who immigrates to the United States from China and helps her parents run the motel that they work at. So that's what I brought with me.
Sounds really interesting.
But I also have a lot of books on my phone. So I'm trying to think what I've got there. Many good ones. The one that I finished reading recently that I loved so much is I don't think it's in German yet, but it's called The Ornithologist's Field Guide to Love by India Holton.
Not heard of it.
I know. It's definitely flying under the radar right now, but it is kind of it's a romance, cozy fantasy, which is not what I'm usually into. It's not like a fantasy like Fourth Wing. There's not like big old dragons, and it's not dark, and it's lovely, and it feels a little bit like Indiana Jones, and I really quite like that one.
Okay. I have no clock, so I can't tell what the time is. I'm looking over. Okay. Julia Quinn, thank you so much. It has been a wonderful interview.
Yes, and thank you all so much for coming
and sharing with us today.